Hey, welcome to episode 3 of our inventory system series. So in this episode, we're going to be covering setting up this kind of scene to make it a bit more playable. I want to be able to move around as the character properly instead of dragging the bean around like this. And I'm going to put some chests in the scene so when we start working on the UI, we can have things to go and interact with. And we'll start putting the UI together as well. So let's just jump straight into it. Where I left off in the last episode, our player's got an inventory list here, a list of slots, and as we go over the slots, they fill up. And eventually, once the inventory is full, stuff won't pick up off the ground. And items can have different stack sizes. So if we set test item 1, which is the red spheres, to a stack size of 5, and we hit play, then we click the player. As we go over, we can pick up 5 of test item 1. Stack size of item 2 is 1, so we'll pick up them, and then we can start a new stack here of 5 more test item 1s. That stack's full, so we'll start to put so the other 2 went into the next free slot there. So that's where we are. That's where we're at. The first thing I want to do then is I just want to make it so we can actually move around with WASD. And to do that in this series, we're going to be using the new input system. So I'm going to go up to Window, Package Manager. I'm going to go to Unity, Registry. Select Input System and then hit Install. This is going to install and it'll ask us to restart the editor once it's installed. You just need to hit yes to that and it'll restart our project. So I'll catch back up with you after that's done. Okay, so we're back in Unity here after it's reset. After the project is restarted, so you can see that the input system is now in our project. So I'm just going to close this down and we'll come back to moving the character in a sec, but let's just make a bit of a scene to actually move around. I'm just going to delete all of these test items apart from the original test item 1 and 2, just because I want them a bit more organized. I'm going to right click, create 3D object and make a plane. I'll center this in the world. I'm just going to scale it up. We'll make a new material, make this kind of a grayish color. Gray. I'm going to create an empty object. I'm going to call this small chest. And again, center that in the scene. I'm going to right click 3D object, make a cube. Bring this up. Going to make another material called brown. While I'm here, I'm just going to make another one called gold. So to represent our chest, I'm going to just duplicate this cube, bring it forward, move it up, and then let's scale it down and make this gold. So that's our small chest, and then let's make, oh, what have I done? And then we'll make big chest. And we'll make that slightly bigger, so we've got small chest and big chest. Let's move our small chest just back over there. Big chest, back. Rotate. We might make more chests later on. Well, in fact, we will make more chests later on. So we've got our bean here. I'm just going to add another. I'm going to add a 3D cylinder. Oh. And I'm just going to give him some eyes, just so we can see which direction they're pointing. Now let's add a script called player movement. This, I'm just going to get the character controller.move script. If you just search for Unity character controller script, and it's this one. Let's just steal this up from the bottom up to there, and then we can come back to our script. Let's just paste that in. So we've got our character controller. Here, because we're using the new input system, instead of this get axis horizontal, get axis vertical. For now, let's just remove these. I'll just put 0 because we're using the new input system. I'm just going to get rid of this, the jumping stuff, because it doesn't seem to work ever anyway for this character controller. So we can get rid of jump height or whatever. Let's go back to our project. I'm just going to drag this player movement script over into scripts. Make a new folder for materials. Pop our materials over there to keep organized. I'm going to create a new folder called input. And in input, I'm going to create a new input actions called player controls. And I'm going to open this up. I'm going to call our action map player here. And I'm going to choose pass through, vector 2, under binding. Under add binding, I'm going to add a 2D vector composite. And I'm just going to delete this binding that was made already. So for up, I'm going to have the W key. For downs, the S key. Left is the A key. Right is the D key. I'm going to save the asset, and then I'm going to close this. Click generate C# assets. I'm going to click the player controls and click generate C# class and hit apply. Over in our player movement script, I'm just going to say private player controls called player controls. And in start, we can say player controls is equal to new player controls. And then in our onEnable function, we want to say player controls.enable. And in our onDisable function, we just want to say player controls.disable. And then in update, so this X was the horizontal axis. So we can say player controls dot player dot new action. Okay, we don't want it to be called new action. We need to go back to our player control input action asset, and I should have called this movement. Hit save. X out of this. Back to our script. So this is movement dot read value vector 2 X. Then we can do Control C, Control V, and we'll do Y for the Z axis. Okay, so if you don't understand the input system, if you've not used it before, I'll explain these in just a second. But the first thing actually is I've changed the start method to awake. I'm going to change this to get component instead of add component. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say require component type of character controller. And I've also put the kind of null operator here. So player controls question mark dot enable. So if player controls isn't null, then we'll enable them. And if it's not null and we disable, we'll disable them as well. So back in our project, let's add the player movement script to our character controller. And you'll see that it's in the ground there, the capsule collider. We just need to raise this up by 1. So our character controller is now on the ground. So the way the input action asset is working, so we called it player controls. That's the input action asset, which is also the name of the script that was generated when we clicked generate C# class. Inside there, we have an action map called player. We created an action called movement. And then under that, we put a 2D vector, which is controlled by up and down, U and S, and then left and right is A and D. And if you think of this as like a 2D kind of sort of a unit circle. So we've got our circle. Again, I'm on my mouse here, so it's not going to be perfect. This is our y-axis. This is our x-axis. Got A and D control our x-axis. W and S control our y-axis. So if I'm holding W down, we're going to be up here. So that's going to be 1. If I'm holding S down, this will be -1. A will be -1 on the X, and then D, sorry, it'll be +1 on the X. So in our script, when we're reading the value, we've got player controls, which again was the name of the input action. This is the actual action map, player. Movement was the action that we made, and then we're reading the vector2 value of that, and we're taking the X value for the X of our movement vector, and we're taking the Y value for the Z of our vector3. So the Y is going to be forward, so that was W and S, and then the X is A and D for left and right. So all things working as they should be. Let's just move our camera into a better position. So just so we can see our objects and chest. As we start moving, we can walk around and pick up the items. We're going very slowly. So I'm just going to go back to our player movement script, and I'm going to, I'll just make this public because we could serialize the field, but I'm just going to make it public. So we'll go back to our player speed. Let's set that to 5. Let's see if that's better. There we go. We're moving around a lot better now. So we can move around. We've got our chests, which we can bump into. We can't interact with them yet, but we will work on that. Okay, so we've got our bean. I don't like the colors I've chosen. There we go. I've got a blue bean. We've got our test items. We've got a chest, which we'll interact with later. Okay, so now we need to start working on our actual UI. So let's right click, create a UI canvas, and we'll just call this, we'll just leave that called canvas. Because we're using the new input system, on our event system, we just need to click this here, replace the input system with the new input system module. We can do that, that's all working fine. So we go to our canvas and we want to say screen space overlay, that's fine. But we want to come down to UI scale mode and change to scale with screen size. And I'm just going to put in 1920 by 1080. And the first thing I'm going to do under this is I'm going to come to our canvas. I'm going to right click, create empty, and I'm just going to call this mouse object. And our mouse object is going to have an image. And it's also going to have some text. I'm going to use text mesh pro. We just need to import TMP essentials. So I'll just hit that. We'll close this window, and I'm going to hit the 2D button up here, select our mouse object, and then press F just so we fly over to that. And then I'm going to just position this. So I'm just going to type in 10 just so I can get kind of what it looks like. Let's center it. I'm going to make it black. I'm just going to put this in the corner here of our image. So actually, we don't want to center it on the alignment. We want to right align it. We'll bring this up here, and let's resize this box. Because obviously, if we had 100 items, we want it to come out from that right-hand side. We don't want it to be centered. So let's put 99 as a default. I'm going to bring it away from that corner and check auto size. That'll fill the box nicely. I might actually reduce the maximum size a little bit. And I'll just place that there. So this is our mouse object. For our mouse object, we're going to add a script. I'm going to come over to inventory scripts. I'm going to right click, create C# script, and we're going to say inventory. I'm just going to call this mouse item data. We'll open this up. And for now, let's just get a reference to the image. So we need to be using Unity engine.ui, and we need to use TM Pro. And let's get a public image reference to our item sprite, and we'll get a public TM Pro UGUI text mesh pro UGUI. And we'll say item count. So we'll go to our mouse object, and let's just add the mouse item data script, and then we'll just drag in image and drag in text for now. And then on void awake, I'm just going to set the item sprite dot color equal to color dot clear to make it invisible, and I'm going to say item count dot text equal to just a null string. So when we hit play, that'll disappear. So that's great. We don't need to see that if we're not currently actively holding an item. So that's our mouse object, which we will come back to later. Now let's create a panel. So create UI panel, and we're going to start making the hotbar. So I'm just going to call this hot player hotbar, and let's check the whole thing. I'm going to click here, the anchor presets button. I'm going to hold down Alt. You can see that we changed the pivot in the snap in. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to change the anchor pivot to the bottom center. See that moved there. So now as we start to like scale, so you'll see now that that kind of snaps to the bottom. So if I start to resize this, it's kind of anchored at the bottom of the screen. So let's just drag that down there. For our panel here, I'm just going to add a content size fitter, and we can set that to preferred size for both of those. And I'm going to have a horizontal layout group. In that, I'm going to give some padding of 15 with a spacing of 10. Child alignment, I'll leave at upper left, and child force expand, that's fine. So now I'm going to make a inventory slot to go on our hotbar. And this is going to be kind of, it's going to match the slots on the back end. Like we're going to pair it with a slot on the back end. So to our hotbar, I'm just going to right click, create empty, and I'm just going to call this inventory slot underscore UI. And then underneath this game object, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to UI and choose image. And it's just going to be like just like the mouse slot. So we're going to have an image and we're going to have UI text for Text Mesh Pro. And in fact, let's just copy, let's make a duplicate. I'm going to rename this to item count. Control D to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to drag it under our inventory slot UI, and then reset the position on the X and Y. Rename it to remove the 1 there. Let's just zoom in and position it where we want it. We want it down at the bottom of our inventory slot. And to the actual top level parent of inventory slot, I'm just going to add a component. I'm going to add a button component, and this is how we're going to interact with the screen. So it's not going to be a drag and drop kind of style interface. It's going to be you click on the slot to pick it up, and then you click on another slot to place it down. The reason for that is because I want this to be able to work on game controllers, and you can't drag and drop on a game controller unless you were manipulating the mouse with a joystick, and I don't really like that. This is going to be more Minecraft style or Stardew Valley style. You can highlight a slot, click it, go to a different slot, place it. So we're going to put a button on our inventory slot UI. For the target graphic, we need to add an image. So I'm just going to choose image. We drag our image under the graphic of the button. That's fine for now. We can put a source image in there in a second. But I'm now going to come back over to our assets, right click, create folder, prefabs. And under our prefab folder, I'm going to drag our inventory slot UI. I'm going to make a prefab out of it. And then I'm just going to duplicate this 9 times. So we've got 10 slots on our hotbar. So Control D until we've got 10 inventory slots, and you can see our hotbar here. I'm just going to remove gizmos out of this scene. So you can see that we've got our inventory slots here on our hotbar. And then we've got a placeholder for our mouse slot. So on our inventory slot UI prefab, we're going to add a script to it. So I'm going to go back to our scripts folder, and I'm going to make a folder called UI scripts. I'm just going to go in here, right click, create C# script. I'm going to call this inventory slot underscore UI. And I'll open that up in Visual Studio. So this is obviously a mono behavior. We don't need these two using statements, but we will need using Unity engine.ui. We'll need to use Text Mesh Pro again, so using TM Pro. And we can get rid of start and update for now. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to serialize field, private image sprite, item sprite. We can do a serialize field for the private Text Mesh Pro UGUI, which is our item count. Serialize field, private inventory slot, our assigned inventory slot, which is our backend slot that's represented by the actual UI elements. So we can make a private button called button. I'm going to make a public property, so a public inventory slot, assigned inventory slot with a getter for our private variable. Then over in our void awake function, I'm going to say item sprite.sprite is equal to null. Item sprite.color is equal to color.clear. Item count slot.text is equal to a blank string. We're going to get our button component, so button.getComponent button, and then if button isn't null, we're going to subscribe to its onClick event. So we're going to add a listener, and we're going to add a method called onUISlotClick, which we can make here, public void onUISlotClick. So in here, we're going to, in a second, make a display, another class, which we're going to access. We're going to access that class. So access display class function. So the relevant function on that display class, which we'll make. And I'm going to make a public void clear slot function, which is actually just going to do this. But I'm also going to check the assigned inventory slot is, if it's null, then we're going to clear the slot there as well. So if we're clearing the slot on the UI, we want to make sure that that's reflected in the system as well. So we'll just do clear slot here, and then we can actually just get rid of this. We can call clear slot in the awake function as well. And then I'm going to make a public void init function for like initialized, and I'm just going to pass in a slot when we initialize this slot. So inventory slot slot, I'm going to say assigned inventory slot equals inventory slot, slot I've just called it, not in slot. So assigned inventory slot is equal to the slot that we've passed in, and then I'm going to update the UI slot. So this is going to be the graphics, so it's going to pass in, it's going to pass the slot on. So public void update UI slot, which takes in an inventory slot called slot. In here we can say if inventory slot dot data, if slot dot data item data is not equal to null, then we will set our item sprite dot sprite equal to the slot dot item data dot icon, and we'll make the sprite visible by setting the color back to color dot white. If the data is null, then we just want to clear the slot. So if for some reason we've passed in a slot that has no data in it, we just want to clear that slot anyway, just to make sure that that's reflected properly. So that's the icon, and then we also want to check the stack size. So if slot.stack size is greater than 1, we'll say item count.text is equal to slot.stack size .toString. So if we've only got one of the item, we won't display the number. That's down to you. Maybe you want it to display it when there is only one, but I prefer it so if there's only one item, we just don't have a number next to it. So then we can say else item count dot text is equal to a null string. So we can actually put this inside here. And I want a version of this method that we can call without passing in a slot, so we can just refresh it directly. So I'm just going to say update UI slot, which won't take in any kind of arguments, and I can just say that if our assigned inventory slot isn't null, then we'll update the UI slot by passing in our assigned inventory slot. So the reason for this is we may just want to refresh the slot without passing in an inventory slot, so this is a good way to do that. We'll just refresh it based on the assigned inventory slot that we've given it anyway when we set up the slots. Okay, so let's just pop back over to the editor and set this up. So if we go over to our prefab, let's add our inventory slot UI script to our prefab. Then we could say item sprite is that, item count is that. Our assigned inventory slot, it starts as null, that's fine. So let's go back, and then we can see that our slot UI is here. They've all been updated to have a reference to their own images and item counts, so that's grand. So now we need our inventory display class. So again, let's go back to our scripts folder, UI scripts, and let's go over to, so let's right click, create C# script, and we're going to call this inventory display. And we'll double click and open that. So this is going to be an abstract class. We're not going to use this class directly. And we're going to want to get rid of start and update. And we don't need system.collections. We will be using .generic though. And we want using Unity engine.events and also using Unity engine.input system. Okay, so this is going to need a few different variables. So we're going to need a protected inventory system. So this is going to be the inventory system that we want to display. So inventory system. And again, we'll make a getter for this. So public inventory system, we get inventory system. I want a protected, I'm going to keep all my getters down at the bottom. So we want a protected dictionary, and this is going to take in an inventory slot UI and inventory slots. And we'll just call this the slot dictionary. So you see now that we basically marry up a UI slot against its like actual slot in the inventory system. So we go back to our little graphic here. You can see that we've got the system and we've got the UI. These UI slots are the physical kind of in-game representations of these system slots. So you can see that this is how it's going to look. It's going to, when it's got an item, it's going to display the item's graphic. When it's got an item and there's a stack size greater than 1, it'll display a number of that to represent the stack size. So this is the representation of the actual slots in the data sort of system in the back end of it. So by using a dictionary, if we pass in a UI slot, we can get out the slot that it's sort of married to, which is great. That's exactly what we need to be doing. And I'm going to make this publicly accessible as well. So public dictionary inventory slot UI is the key, inventory slot as the value, and I'll say slot dictionary, and then we'll get the slot dictionary. And I'm going to also serialize field mouse item data. I'll call this mouse inventory item, and we can set this in the inspector. Another option would be to use to make a singleton out of this. We could get it that way. That's the way I did it in my test project, but to not have to go through what a singleton is and all that, we're just going to call this, we're just going to set this in the inspector and make sure that we do. So we're going to need a public abstract void function that our derived classes are going to use. So that's going to be public abstract void assign slots. And this is going to take in the inventory system, which is the inv to display. So when we assign the slots, we're going to create this dictionary. So we need to know which slots to marry up with the actual inventory slot UI kind of representations. I'm going to make a protected void, protected virtual void, called update slots, update slot. And then this is going to take in an inventory slot called updated slot. And this isn't abstract because it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same no matter which kind of variation of this class we make. So we can just define it here. So we could say for each slot, so variable slot in the slot dictionary, if slot.value is equal to the updated slot that we've passed in, then let's update the UI slot of the corresponding inventory slot. So now this is getting quite confusing because I've, stuff's kind of called the same thing. So on our inventory display class, we've got this function update slot, and we're going to pass in a system slot. So this is this script where it's got all of the actual system elements to it. We're going to pass that slot in, and then we're going to check for every slot in our slot dictionary. We're going to loop through them, and if that slot that we're looking at, if the value of that entry is the slot that we've passed in, then we're going to update the UI slot that corresponds to the inventory system slot. And here that's the key, because you'll see that the inventory slot UI is our key. The inventory slot system isn't the key, it's the value. So we can update the UI slot there. So this is the slot value, the under the hood inventory slot. This is the slot key, the UI representation of the value. This will have another function called slot clicked, which we're not going to do in this episode because it's quite a long script. That's probably going to be an episode all on its own. But this is going to take in a clicked slot. For now, we'll just say debug.log slot clicked. So this function is what we're going to use on our actual inventory slot. So if I go back to inventory slot, I'm going to make a public property of inventory display. And we don't need to set this in the inspector, so I don't need a private version of this. I can just say get private set. I need to call it something, so parent display. And here in the awake function, we can just set parent display equal to transform.parent.getComponent inventory display. So in our on UI slot click function, this is where we can say parent display dot on slot. So that's where we can say parent display slot clicked this, which will go through to the inventory display function, and it'll debug.log slot clicked. So the last thing I want to do is I just want to make the first kind of derived script from this, the first kind of instance of this script. So in our UI scripts folder, I'm going to create C# script. I'm going to call this static inventory display. And we'll open this up. So the first thing this is going to do is going to implement, it's going to inherit from inventory display. And you see that we've got a squiggle here. If we press Alt and Enter, we can implement the abstract class, which is this assign slots function. We can get rid of start and update from here. What we actually need to do is in inventory display, I want to make a public virtual void start, just in case we need to do stuff in there later. And then in our static inventory display, I can do public override void start And this doesn't need to be public, actually. Sorry, that needs to be protected. So protected, override, void start. We can call our base start. So at the top of our static inventory display, I'm going to need two fields. So I want a serialized field, private inventory holder, called inventory holder, and serialized field, private inventory slot UI array called slots. Now in our start function, I can say if inventory holder is not equal to null. So if we've actually assigned it in the inspector, then we can say the inventory system is equal to the inventory holder dot inventory system. We can subscribe to the inventory systems on inventory changed function, and we're going to subscribe our update slots function to that event. The update slot function to the event. So that's the method that we've got on our inventory display here. That event is this on slot changed. So when we do something and add something to the inventory, we call on inventory slot changed, and we invoke that. And here, I'm just going to else, and I'll do debug.log warning, no inventory assigned to this.game object, just so we know if something's gone wrong. And then after all of that, we can say assign slots inventory system. So we can assign our slots and pass in our inventory holders inventory system. Again, inventory system is over on our inventory display class. It's this protected inventory system variable here. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get rid of this throw new exception, and we're going to say slot dictionary is equal to a new dictionary of inventory slot UIs and inventory slots. And then we're going to say for int I, whilst I is less than the inventory system dot inventory size, which, because this is a static display, we've set this up in the inspector to have 10 slots. So we need to make sure that the inventory system that we're pairing it with also has 10 slots. We could check for that and debug it, but I know, I'm looking for the hotbar, which is, I've said for my game has 10 slots. So I've represented that over on the UI. Once that's set up, that should not change. You would implement a check if you wanted to. So you could check your array size versus the inventory size. And if it's not the same, then do an error. I suppose for good practice, let's just do that quickly. So if slots.length is not equal to inventory system.inventory size, then again, debug.log inventory slots out of sync on this.game object. So for int I equals 0, whilst it's less than the inventory size, we're going to add to our slot dictionary dot add, and we're going to pass in the key, which is the slots I. So it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's the corresponding slot in our array. So slots I, and then the value is going to be the inventory system dot inventory I, and I can't seem to get inventory, so I've obviously not made a getter for it. So let's just go to inventory holder, inventory system. Oh, I called it inventory slots here, that's why. So inventory slots I. So that's our value. This is our key. So this is the UI slot, and this is the value of the actual like system slot. So we've added that to our dictionary, and then we just want to initialize the UI slot. So we can say inventory slot. So we can say inventory system dot inventory slots I. Because remember, the init function takes in an inventory slot, an assigned inventory slot, and then it updates the slot as well. So let's just go back into Unity. I'm going to click on player hotbar. I'm going to add our static inventory script, or static inventory display. For the inventory holder, I'm just going to drag in our player. And for slots, I'm going to open up our hotbar. I'm going to click the lock up here to lock the inspector. And I'm going to get all of our inventory slots, and I'm going to drag them into our slots array. Now I want them to be, they need to be in the correct order. So, you know, slot 0, which is this one, is element 0. Slot 9, or slot 10, sorry, is this one. So and this is the size 10. And while we're here, I'm just going to drag the mouse object into the mouse inventory item. I just had an error. I've put button.getComponent button. I need to say button equals getComponent button. So now we need to get some assets. So I'm going to go create folder, and I'm going to call this graphics. Okay, so that's on our inventory slot prefab. I'm going to change. We have this image here. I'm just going to make this like a brown kind of color to kind of indicate the slot being empty. And then we have an image here, which if I disable that, we can see that the slot's now brown. This image that was currently white should go clear when we hit play, because that's the actual item sprite. So let's even, you know, reduce the width and height of this. So 85, 85. So this is the actual slot, which is brown. And then there's the item image, which is white in this case. And let's go back to our inventory slot, go to overrides, hit apply all. So now here's our slots with an item sprite in it. And when we hit play, we're going to clear them out, and we've got our slots now. So when we hit play, they go clear because they've been assigned a blank inventory slot. We can walk around. When we pick up an item, so we've got our test item here. There's currently no sprite icon attached to it, but it will go white. So when we go over an item, it'll go white, and we'll see that we've got an item in that slot. Go over another item, that slot now has an item in it. If we've got multiples of this item, so test item 2 can be stacked. So let's just make a couple of these, hit play. When we go over, you can see that we've now got 3 of these test items in the slot, but there's no icon. So in the next episode, we're going to build upon this system. We'll add in some icons for these. And then we're going to work on the actual click functionality. So at the minute, when I click the slots, nothing happens. Like you can see that I haven't picked it up. I've not done anything. So that's what we're going to work on next. As always, if you're watching these kind of as they're coming out, the full series is already out and over on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/danposs. When you support on Patreon, you'll also get access to the project file packages for each episode as well. So even if you're watching and they're all out, it's worth heading over there anyway. If you want to compare your code to mine, you can do that by downloading the project files. If this episode didn't make sense, if there was something that was unclear, please do let me know in the comments below, or join the Discord server, which is linked in the description. Me or someone else may be able to help you if you're having trouble there. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.